Firstly, can we just have a big round of applause for Imriel for putting on such an incredible event today? I think the whole day has been absolutely fantastic. And it's actually so good to be in a room full of women, female-identifying people. It's just good vibes, you know? It's just good vibes, like we can just connect without, you know, other stuff. So, I'm going to start by telling you a story. And so I've had one consistent message from the majority of people who have managed me throughout my whole career. And that is, stay in your lane. People will say things to me like, you know, that podcast, that's just a hobby of yours, and you know, you should really just focus on your actual job and just stay in your lane. And there was one particular thing that really stood out to me. And I remember I was doing a performance review, and my manager at the time, she had something to say about some of the things that I was doing. So I had started a diversity group where I had worked, because at the time I was one of only like 3 black people in the entire office. And it was an attempt for me to try and find my people, but also like put a focus on some of the events that were really important to me and really focus on some of those cultural moments. And it was actually really encouraged at the time to, you know, do things outside of your day job. Like, that's the type of things that will like take you to the next level. And she just looked me dead in the eye and was like, you know, she was American. I'm actually not taking the piss. She was like, you know, that diversity thing, I think you should make it a hobby and do it outside of work. And I was like, wow. And the ironic thing about that story is that shortly after that conversation, I actually got made redundant. And I was so speechless when she told me this. And at the time, it was around Christmas, and everyone was getting ready for the Christmas party and the team offsite. And I know these things are like small things in the grand scheme of things, but I was like, I actually can't sit at home and watch everyone do up enjoyment on Instagram when I'm sitting here unemployed. And so what I decided to do was I booked a flight. I had like 2 weeks notice. I booked a flight to Thailand on Friday, left on Monday. And the reason I did that was I just tried to take control of what I could in that situation. And that series of events really changed the trajectory of the rest of my career. I've been constantly told to stay in my lane, not step out of line and do what's expected of me. And I can tell you, that attitude got me absolutely nowhere. And I've been able to carve out opportunities for myself and in turn for other people and create more opportunities for others. So, it's about time I introduce myself. My name is Leanne Alie, aka your resident podcast queen. And I am a podcast producer, presenter, commissioner, and today I want to talk to you about being unconventional. So what does it mean to be unconventional? According to the Cambridge Dictionary, being unconventional is to be different from what is usual or the way that most people do things. And to me personally, it means leading with your point of difference, your unique perspective, and doing exactly what you want, even if other people tell you otherwise. And my route into the industry has been exactly that, unconventional. My first job was in ad sales, and like I said, I created this diversity group, and one of the projects that I worked on was a podcast project, which I worked on with the content team. And up until that point, like, I had only ever listened to podcasts. I hadn't made anything. I didn't know how to produce. I just listened to podcasts for years and years. And like, I hadn't studied radio or audio. I studied marketing. And shortly after I lost my job, I was approached by the British Podcast Awards to create or to work with them in a diversity consultative capacity. And then when that happened, I just really ran with this consulting thing, and I managed to work with a lot of audio bodies across the industry. And that helped me really navigate the industry quite quickly, and it showed me actually the industry isn't that big and scary. Like, it's actually quite easy to navigate yourself around. And following that, I worked as a marketing project manager at a radio company, and I shadowed my producer colleagues who taught me how to produce, because I realized at the time, if I wanted to progress in this industry, I'm going to have to be able to know how to make content. And so I produced independent shows in the evenings and the weekends, and really just learned how to upskill. And then this then led me to a role at the BBC. So this is a picture of me like in my first week with my BBC badge. I was very gassed. And the reason I was so excited is because even though I'd been able to work across the industry up until that point, I didn't know anyone at the BBC. I didn't really have any ins. And even as an outsider coming in, there was still quite a high barrier to entry in that, in my opinion. And I had a role within commissioning, and it was really exciting because for the first time, I had the opportunity to put other people on and bring other people in. I brought in a ton of freelancers and production companies that hadn't worked with the BBC before. And best believe, everybody I brought in was a person of colour. That was one thing that was definitely going to happen with me. And if you've worked with me, you know that as well. So then I realised that I had stories of my own that I wanted to tell, and I decided to make my own podcast and make a documentary. I'd actually not made a documentary up until this point, but I'd listened to loads, so I was like, I'm going to invest in myself and bet on myself, and decided to give it a try. And hence my child, Coiled, was born, and she was very big. She was 25 gigabytes. She was huge. And I say all this to say that if I had listened to those who had told me to stay in my lane, I would not have been able to accelerate and do the things that I love doing now. And I definitely wouldn't be talking to you all today. And so that's why it's important to bet on yourself, invest in yourself, and believe in yourself, as you can't rely on other people to do that or validate you. So, let's talk about podcasting, my favorite thing in the entire world. So, I think we have a unique opportunity when it comes to podcasting. Anyone can make a podcast, share their perspective, their diversity of thought, and their lived experiences. And oftentimes people ask me, should I even make this podcast? There are so many podcasts out there. And I'm like, nobody would say there's too much music out there. Nobody would say don't make music. So I'm always like, yes, make your podcast, definitely. And I'm a firm believer that everybody has a unique story to tell, as we all have different lived experiences. Podcasting is a way in which we can change perspectives and change behaviors in society. And it's a medium that is so powerful because, unlike any other medium, the barriers to entry are so low. Anyone can make a podcast from their phone, even publish online for free, and there's no middleman or editor or anybody else saying what you can and can't say or what you can and can't publish. And we have the power, and the power is in our hands. And especially as marginalized creators, this is something that nobody can take away from us. So all of you guys that are makers out there, I really encourage you to keep making content and start building your audiences, because the opportunities out there to build are there. So I'll talk a little about my baby, Coiled. So Coiled is a documentary podcast all about black hair and all its forms and textures and how it intersects with the black British experience, from things like how Britain's colonial history impacts attitudes towards Afro hair today, to where do our weaves and wigs actually come from, because they definitely don't come from Brazil or Peru or any of these places that they tell us, to why it's important to buy black-owned hair products. And the reason I started this podcast is way back after the first lockdown, when they let us out for the first time, the first thing that I did is I went straight to the hair salon. And I got a relaxer, which is when you chemically straighten your hair. And I remember after that, I did it completely without thinking. And then I watched Emma Devery's Channel 4 documentary, and it was called Hair Power, and it was all about how powerful black hair was and how amazing it was. And I was just like, actually, my hair can't do that because I've been straightening it for so many years, and I don't think I want to do that anymore. And it just led me to have so many more questions around black hair, and I just wanted to explore it more. And then I started having conversations with friends, family members, just about their hair, and every single time I would literally chat for an hour. Everyone has so much to talk about, and so I decided that I wanted to document my transition from relaxed hair to natural hair, but also try and make a podcast that my younger self, if I had listened to it, would maybe have made different choices when it came to my hair. And so I made Coiled independently, and that was a very conscious decision that I made. And how many of you guys are independent podcast creators? Yeah, loads. Amazing. And so the benefits of being independent podcast creator is that you have full creative control. You own the intellectual property to your podcast, which is where the money really resides in this industry. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. And you capture a moment in time that is discoverable forever. Some of the downsides of being an independent podcast creator is that you can be limited in terms of reach, and you can be limited in terms of funds. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to get your content commissioned, or you shouldn't make what you want to make either. So let me get real about the opportunities that there are within the podcasting space at the moment. So the UK podcasting industry is small, and that is a good thing and a bad thing in some ways. So it's small, which means it's easy to navigate. And that also means there are 4 main platforms where you can pitch your content to try and get it commissioned. And that is the BBC, Spotify, Audible, and Global. You can also pitch to production companies, independent production companies, to try and get your work commissioned, although for the most part they might end up pitching to one of these 4 platforms, because what I am finding is that a lot of production companies in the UK, their business models don't really allow them to make original content. Saying that, there are some that do make original content, like Message Heard and Broccoli Productions, so I definitely recommend getting in touch with them if you can. The other thing that you can do is pitch to brands to create collaborative branded content, and the best way to do that, I would say, is getting in touch with brands directly. But saying all that, it can be difficult to cut through, and I can say that from experience. There are only so many opportunities across these 4 platforms, and some of these commissioning processes are more transparent than others. And if you're a creator from a marginalised group, it can be even harder to get your ideas over the line. I am one of only a handful of commissioners of colour in the UK podcasting landscape, and we actually can't shy away from the fact that the lack of diversity with those who are decision makers directly affect the type of content that we see. The other thing that should be noted is that from a business perspective, a lot of platforms take the strategy of engaging with big celeb names or influencers that have a large reach or social footprint, because in theory, that translates into listeners. And the more listeners a podcast gets, the more money the platform can generate, and the more they can then invest into podcasting. So that, I feel, is the reality, but there are opportunities out there. And there are more things coming up, and there are more opportunities for marginalised creators to actually cut through and make content and have their stories heard. And so I want to talk to you through a few that I think are doing amazing work. So we have Multitrack. Multitrack is an audio production internship scheme for people of colour, where entry-level audio producers are placed within independent production companies to develop their skills and start their audio career. So I am on the board of trustees for Multitrack. We're going into our 3rd year, and we've actually had so many amazing producers come through this, who weren't producers when they started. It's actually incredible to see the transformation, and it's run by a group of volunteers who are just really passionate about making change in this industry. And so I highly recommend, if you're in your early stages, getting engaged with Multitrack, because they do really amazing work. We also have the Spotify Sound Up Bootcamp, which is a podcast training bootcamp that amplifies diverse female voices, I should say, by taking part in an intense training program that provides educational opportunities, resources, and access to industry experts. And by the end of the program, you're able to make a podcast pilot. And I think the scheme is really great because Spotify is one of those platforms that can be very difficult to get into if you don't have a way in. And this is a really great way where they're trying to make the content that they make more representative and more accessible. And then we also have BBC Sound's Audio Lab, which is something that I work on and have developed. I'll tell you how that all came about, because it's completely changed the way we started commissioning at the BBC. And so I'll take you back to the summer of 2020. It was the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. And put your hands up if you're having conversations about race in the workplace. Yeah, everyone. Literally, we never had a conversation about race in the workplace, and then the murder of George Floyd happened and everybody wanted to talk about it. And there's one thing about talking about these things, but there's a difference in actually doing something about it in your respective field. And so at the time, there was something called the Equality in Audio Pact, which Renee Richardson at Broccoli Content had started. And it was a pact that had 5 core things which she thought that all audio companies within the sector should adhere to try and make the industry more inclusive and equitable. And so I remember seeing this, and it's gone kind of viral online a little bit, and all of our suppliers at the BBC had signed up for it, the majority of them. And so I then took this to my team and was like, is there any way the BBC can sign up for this? Because all of our suppliers have signed up for this, so it seems like we should definitely sign up. And it eventually got pushed up to the right people, and it eventually got signed. And that then turned into a conversation of, okay, well, what can we do to support more diverse creators on BBC Sounds? And so I worked with a group of commissioning producers at the BBC at the time. I think there was about 5 of us, and we came up with this concept called BBC Sounds Audio Lab. And it is an accelerator program for podcast creators that are individuals who have podcast ideas that they want to make but lack the key resources or access to do it. And so it was open to everybody, but we really encouraged those from underrepresented groups to apply. And we were just looking for stories, untold stories, underrepresented perspectives, stories that we don't hear from often. And we put out a call out last summer. As a result, we have commissioned these 6 amazing podcasts, which you can listen to over the summer. And we gave each of the creators a budget, production, mentors, training, and they also get to keep the IP for their podcast, which is something that we haven't done before at the BBC. And the whole point of this is that I remember when I started, I would just get loads and loads of emails and DMs with people with podcast ideas, but if you're outside of the industry, or if you're an independent creator, you don't necessarily know how to navigate the indie scene, how to even pitch to us. And so this was an attempt to break down the barriers to entry and just give ourselves more great stories on sounds where we can better serve our audiences. There is also the Audio Content Fund, which is a fund supported by the UK government to fund independent producers and indies to make content for commercial and community radio. This fund is currently under review, but we really hope it comes back because it's absolutely fantastic and has funded some really amazing work. Also, we cannot forget about platforms like Patreon and Apple Podcast subscriptions, which allow creators to put the power back into your own hands. And subscription models are something that I think we're going to see more and more of in the UK scene. It's something that is definitely booming a lot more in the US. And I wanted to talk about Hannah and Sharuthi from Red Handed podcast. So Red Handed is a true crime podcast, and Hannah and Sharuthi have one of the biggest Patreon platforms in the UK. They use their Patreon to give subscribers access to ad-free episodes, an exclusive after show, monthly bonus content, and pre-sales to live shows. And through a lot of hard work and consistency, they've become full-time podcasters in the space of a couple years. And so I add this example to show that it is definitely possible to grow your audience, make money, and make a business from your podcast if you put in the time and effort and energy. So, those are some opportunities out there to try and make the industry more equitable. And I think the more of these programs that come about, the more great content we'll see, the more people we'll see coming up, there'll be more opportunities. But again, this is why I encourage you to think unconventionally. Because I'm not going to say it's easy. It definitely is not. And I'm speaking from experience. It's very hard. It's hard out here in these streets. Yeah, it's very hard. Especially if you want to make an impactful platform by yourself. I certainly don't have all the answers, and I'm figuring out a lot of it by myself at the moment. And so what I did with Coiled is that I was in a position where I could invest in myself, which I understand not everybody had the ability to do so. What I did is that I used the money from my consulting projects over the last 2 years and put literally all of that into my podcast. But then, the money finna ran out. And so, since then, I found it very difficult to make money off of Coiled. But it's also taught me quite a few things about money in podcasting, which I want to share with you now. And so, what I've learned is that money in podcast advertising is only really there if your podcast listenership reaches a certain threshold, and that threshold is usually around like 50,000 listens per week, I think, or per episode. And in reality, only probably about the top 1 or to 5% of podcasts really achieve that. And that's the type of threshold which monetization platforms like Acast, Audioboom, or Adalicious will start directly pitching you to brands. So again, it's kind of hard to reach that straight away. And then you have spot advertising. Spot advertising is open to everyone that has a podcast, and that is when you can put in your ad markers, and that's when you can insert adverts into your podcast that are pre-made. But again, you're probably looking at between £2 to £5 per 1,000 listens per spot ad. So the same issue applies. You only really see your money if you're getting thousands and thousands of listeners on a consistent basis. Winning a commission isn't necessarily making money off your podcast. That's you being given the money to make the podcast. And like I said, the opportunities are out there, but they are slightly thin. And there are a few grants that you can apply for as well. I think the main one that we have in the UK is the Arts Council, but there's not really much outside of that for actually making podcasts in the UK on like a large level if we're talking about grants. And so this is where I sit at my computer and I get really frustrated because I'm like, this cannot be it. Like, surely this cannot be it. Like, there's always money out there. I am a firm believer that the money is out there. So again, this is when I encourage you to think unconventionally. And I think what we have to do is look over to our peers over in the US, because the podcast market is booming differently there. I feel that podcasts are being acquired, made into TV, films, books. Content is being localized. IP is being sold. And I think creating a podcast in another medium, whether that be a book, a live show, or a TV show, that is where the money really resides in this industry. And I think it's that unconventional thinking that we, especially as marginalized creators, really need to adopt in the UK market. And then when we do, it's about putting other people on. So I'm currently still trying to figure this out, but I think if your content is good and speaks to a really engaged audience, especially if they're underrepresented, then I definitely think you should keep going and just try different ways and think unconventionally about how you can make your stuff bigger and how you can monetize it. And this is where I'm at the moment. I am trying to translate Coiled into another medium, and so I'm manifesting it today, and I know this is being recorded, and so you will see it in some shape or form next year, I'm sure. So, in the meantime, whether you are a seasoned producer or if you're just starting out, there are opportunities out there for everyone in the podcasting space. I firmly believe that, on different scales. And working together, I think we can do so much more. So my biggest advice is to collaborate and work with people that inspire you. I think, especially work with people who have a different skill set to you. You don't actually have to do everything. Like, you can find people who have different skill sets to you, because when you work together, you can do something really great. Also, podcasting takes time and patience. I think we're in a world now where everything is quick, 24-hour content, TikTok here, reel there. You actually don't have to do that all the time. Podcasting takes time and patience. And if you want to build an audience, you have to be prepared to put in the time and invest the effort. And that's when you will see your audience start to grow. And also, the money is out there, it's somewhere. And I think that in order to get there, we need to think more unconventionally about how we get there. It's not all about advertising, I think, in this space. We have to think more unconventionally. And lastly, everyone is looking for ideas. Ideas are currency in this industry. And I personally think it doesn't matter who you are, if you have a great story to tell, it may take a few doors for you to knock on and keep having these conversations, but I do think you will eventually get there if you think unconventionally. And so one of the last things that I wanted to do was, as we're at the International Women's Podcast Festival, shine a light on some women who I think are doing an incredible job in this industry in terms of paving it forward. Paving it forward is something that is very important to me, and I try to do it as much as I can, and I think, especially as women, as marginalized creators, the more we put other people on, the more success we will see. And so I want to talk about a few, quite a few. So, We have Christina Moore, who is the founder of Don't Skip Media, which is a podcast production company. We have Christina Orokosha, who is the co-founder of Vamp, which is a talent agency, and they also have a production arm called Unheard. And she does a really amazing job of bringing in Black voices to the UK media scene. We've got Helen O'Donnell and Katrina Bell at BBC Studios Talent Works, who I think are amazing and do really great work in terms of putting in and developing up-and-coming creators across all different mediums, from podcasts to scriptwriters to TV. We've got Sarah Miles, who is a fantastic audio producer and also the founder of Rise and Shine. And she creates a series of events all about audio production, and they're free events. So if you're starting to get into audio and you want to learn the basics, do check out Rise and Shine. We've got my sisters, Leanne Alie and Roshan Roberts from Dope Black Women. They have an amazing podcast, but also have built a huge community of Black women online and in person across the world. We've got Millie Riley, who is an editor at Apple Podcasts, who's actually done a really good job at platforming diverse creatives on the Apple Podcasts platform. We've got Renee Richardson, who is the CEO of Broccoli Content, and she's doing something that no one else in the UK industry has done, really. She's got a production company, which is a joint venture with Sony, and is putting out some really amazing content. We have Alex Ade at Spotify, who was one of the first people in the industry that paved it forward for me, opened up her contacts to me, and she's doing some really amazing work in bringing other people in. We've got Nikki Logan, who is, again, amazing audio producer. Everyone's just really great at what they do. And she has a podcast studio in East London, Dutchy Studios. So if you're looking for a Black-led, female-led studio to record at, check out Dutchy Studios. It is a really lovely place to record. We have my homegirl, Sylvie Carlos, who is a really fantastic audio producer. She was my assistant producer on Coiled, helped bring my vision to life, but she also puts a lot of other up-and-coming creators on through her work at Story Futures. We also have Emanuela Kumanorti, who is a commissioning exec at BBC World Service, who again is doing some really amazing work in bringing in more diverse voices into BBC. We have Imran Morgan, who again put on this amazing event for all of us today, otherwise we wouldn't all be here. And then we also have Lauren Armstrong-Carter, who is an amazing audio producer. Again, one of the first people in the industry that put me on and just taught me basically all I know about production. So, listen, if I eat, we all eat. And I think for us, especially as marginalised creators, if we want to continue to excel in this field, we've got to put each other on. Collaborate, recommend friends, and share opportunities. I think that's so, so important. So again, I'll encourage you all to think unconventionally, and that's it. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my talk. We've got some time for questions.
Sorry to hog the mic, and I'm Leanne's colleague from BBC, and my question is to the audience. So basically, if you're in the audio world and you want to take that next step into commissioning, we've actually got a 6-month kind of full-time contract coming up in my team, which is to learn about that commissioning process. So I really, really encourage you to come up and speak to me and apply, and I can give you the 101. Happy to meet you over coffee or over Zoom to talk details. But yeah, that's it for me. Thanks.
Really great opportunity. So if you want to get into that side of commissioning or even just into the BBC, the team that Prajeet works in, they're doing some really amazing, innovative stuff. So it's a really great thing if you're interested. Your name?
Hello.
Oh, hi.
Hi. My name's Nahanda. I'm the creator of the Soul Mama podcast,
Nice.
which is a podcast for women of colour going through motherhood, but supporting them with the spiritual side of things. And I actually came up through the Sound Up boot camp, so it was nice to hear you shout out them as well. Thank you for your talk. My question is around the stage that you described of investing in yourself. So you'd saved and then were able to kind of pour into your own podcast. What did you spend the money on, and what did you see had the biggest result?
That's a really good question. So I spent most of that money that I had accumulated on people, because I hadn't made a documentary before. So I was like, well, I need to work with someone that knows how to make documentaries. So I invested in an assistant producer. I also invested in PR because I was like, I didn't really have PR contacts, and I found a really great PR person, actually. People probably know her. She's big on Twitter, Ronke Lowell, and she has really reasonable rates. So I worked with her. I got a videographer for a couple of days to like capture some visual content. Basically, I put money into people where I didn't have the skill set or I couldn't do it by myself to really just elevate what I was doing. Because this is the thing with podcasting, especially if you're making something that's intensive like a documentary, it's very hard to do it all by yourself. So if you can bring in people that have other skill sets to you, that have experience in that area, I would say that's kind of where I put my money the most. Any more questions? We've got time. Hi. Oh, microphone is coming.
I've recently set up my own production company. My background is in radio, and I've just produced my first series, which has done very well. And now I'm at the point of thinking, well, where's the money? It's not as easy to find, is it, as you thought it might be? So as a commissioner, I just want you to find your opinion on people that cold pitch you. What works, what doesn't?
That is a very good question. What's your show, by the way? Plug it.
Why Do I Feel? With Nathan Filer. And we just got a silver at the Arias.
Oh, congrats! Okay, so cold pitch is what I look for, what I don't look for. Interesting. Okay, people have been doing this a lot recently. If you just send me a Word document with text, it's not really giving much. It's not really giving much. Like, I know this is like very basic things, but bring your idea to life, like in a pitch deck. Like, I want to know what the podcast is about, who the talent is, why are they telling this story, if it's a show that already exists, what are some of the topics that you're covering, maybe some of the coverage that you've had. Definitely need to know who the audience is, like their demographic, what they're interested in. And if I speak about the BBC specifically, because they commission via networks or via Audiolab, how does this relate to whichever area that you're pitching to? That's very, very important. So those are some of the things that I look for from a commissioning perspective. And I think also another thing is, no matter what platform you're pitching to, I think you really have to demonstrate what's the benefit for the platform. Maybe you're filling a content area that they don't already have. Maybe you're bringing in different stories and different perspectives that they don't already have. How can you fill in the gaps that they don't have, essentially? Because if you're just bringing something to the table that they already have, like, realistically, they're just going to be like, oh, well, we've just commissioned this, or we already have this that does the same thing and reaches the same audience. So you really have to show your point of difference, I would say, if you want to kind of like pitch to networks.
Quick add-on. We were funded by the Arts Council and the IP.
Oh, yeah.
Created in the wild, pretty much like describing Coil. Do you think that's harder? Do you think it's harder to pitch a second series to a platform?
That's an interesting question. I think pitching a second series to a platform is twofold. It depends what platform you're pitching to. It's good because you've already demonstrated that you already have a highly engaged audience. You know who that audience is, and you know what it takes to make the show. I think the things you need to think about if you're pitching to a platform is how much you want to kind of negotiate your IP, because that's the thing that's going to change. Because if you go to a platform, then the platform will have a percentage share of your IP. And there are pros and cons to that. So it gives you more opportunity, it gives you the budget, it gives you the reach to do what you want to do. But if there's other things you want to do beyond that, then that platform will have like first choice on whatever that goes into. And so, and that also, it depends, because some platforms aren't really into acquiring stuff as much as others. Some of them want to make original content. So another thing that you could do is you could pitch a season 2, or you could pitch a spin-off of your original content, because that still means that you have the audience and you know how to make the content, you have the talent and everything, but it's a different offering. Because that's something that's happened a lot, because they did that with, what's that doctor called? You know, Dr. Ranga?
Yeah.
That one, yeah. So he's got a spin-off on Radio 2. I think that comedian. sorry.
Your names are all gone.
I've gone black. He's on everything. No, it's the Ramesh. That's it.
Ramesh,
he's got a spin-off on like Radio 2 as well.
Yeah.
So you can also pitch a spin-off.
I'm getting the feeling that might be the way for me to go.
Yeah.
I think that might be an easier path.
Yeah,
Thank you.
because then you start from scratch, and then the whole IP conversation is just for that project, and then you can still keep the IP for your original concept, and if you want to do whatever you want with that, then yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for the talk. I have a question, and I'm aiming this isn't specifically for me, but for people who podcasting is maybe a hobby, or it is literally they've got the 9 to 5 and they can't afford, they don't have a indispensable income, right? Because if you take out number 3 about putting money in, have you got like 3 top tips that you could recommend for someone? So if you can't afford to hire people, are there any tips or any techniques or any platforms that they can go to get the things that they need to still do a high quality, even if it's a DIY podcast?
Yes, that's a very good question. You can definitely make a podcast for free. I talk about this a lot. You can definitely make a podcast for free. And so there are various platforms that you can use to make podcasts for free. You can host for free. You can host for Anchor for free. You can edit for free on Audacity. There are loads of music libraries that you can use for free. If you don't know how to edit, there are loads of videos on YouTube. I literally still type, how do you do this on X platform on YouTube. And if you can't afford to bring in people on a professional level, I would try and look for kind of similar creators in a similar field, whether that be students or like fellow creators that just want to make something, and like see if you can collaborate. And then maybe further down the line, it may be something that might become profitable. But if you can find people on your level that are invested in your idea as much as you, that want to collaborate kind of like part-time, that's always a really great way to go. Another thing, in terms of recording, you don't need fancy mics and stuff. I did so many recordings over the pandemic just recording on my phone. And so the way that you do that is you could do Zoom or like a Hangouts or something, and you get each one of your contributors to record your actual voice on your phone, on your voice memo app, and that's the actual audio that you use. So there are loads of free ways to make a podcast. I don't want to put anybody off by thinking that you need loads of money to do it. You can definitely do it for free and on a budget. You don't need fancy like kit and stuff. If you get further down the line, you want to invest in that, then definitely do that. But like I said, you can seriously publish a whole thing on your phone. I remember one time, I think we didn't have access to a studio one time, so I literally put my phone in the middle of the table and we just recorded a conversation. It wasn't the best, but it sounded all right. And so there are definitely ways that you can do it for free. Any more questions? Okay, I think that was the end. Thank you so much for coming.